Welcome to Cut to Legal.
Welcome back to Cut to Legal with James Pacitti. James is the managing attorney at Pacitti Law Firm, where he represents producers, production companies, and creators in the business and legal issues of entertainment. My name is Kevin Rosenquist, and today we're diving into distribution deals and what producers need to know before they sign away rights to their work. James, good to see you.
Good to see you too, Kevin.
So how does a distribution agreement help a film or series actually reach an audience?
Well, it's the contractual conduit which provides for the exhibition of the project. For example, a distribution agreement, essentially with a streamer, will provide that, for instance, for Netflix. That distribution agreement will provide that for whatever the terms are with the streamer. This project will be exhibited on their streaming service. When you're talking about theatrical, it's a little different. You sometimes you can go. It's exhibited directly through companies that work with the exhibitors, or there's a company that will handle distribution. And so it's a broad term. So a distribution agreement can cover a lot of things because there's a lot of ways for projects to be distributed. So the specifics of it depend on every agreement. Every agreement is different. There's a lot of similarities, but it depends the medium, how it's being distributed. You have theatrical, which is theaters. Then, of course, it has the various streaming windows, premium video on demand, and you have streaming video on demand, advertising video on demand, and then you have cable, you have DVDs. So it depends on the medium, but it is the contract that will lead to the project being exhibited in some way.
Do most producers work directly with a distributor? Do they work with a sales agent? How does that all work?
A lot of times it's sales agents. Sales agents have the relationships. It is, obviously they get their percentage, and then whoever is contracted with as a distributor gets their percentage. So sometimes filmmakers will deal directly with distributors, and they don't have the sales agent involved. But very often it is a good idea because the sales agents know who are interested in this particular project, this particular genre. They have all these relationships because you have both foreign and domestic sales agents. Those who will deal with distribution in North America, those will deal with distribution everywhere else around the world. And so it can be challenging for filmmakers to try and do that themselves because also these agreements can be very complicated. And it is very important, obviously, that they get the best terms possible because I analogize for filmmakers entering into a bad distribution agreement, it's kind of like running a football 99 yards down the field and fumbling at the 1 yard line. You gotten through development and finance and production and post-production. You managed to create a film and that people want to see or whatever project it might be. And then you sign a bad distribution deal and you don't ever see any money.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That would be a heartbreaker. So you mentioned the streaming platforms and how they differ from traditional distributors. Are there different negotiations? Are there different contracts? Like, is there a big difference between streaming versus like a theatrical release?
Oh yeah, there's a dramatic difference because with streaming, like I said, there's different kinds. When you say streaming, there's different kinds of streaming. Like I said, with the acronyms are PVOD, AVOD, SVOD. Premium video on demand is where you're gonna pay $14.99 or something, or whatever it might be, $29.99, whatever it is, because even if maybe you even have a subscription service, we talk about the subscription video on demand. You have the distinctions within them where you have Apple and Amazon and you have Netflix, for example. And they're different because whereas you even if you have a subscription to a service, there are some of the titles that you have to pay money for to see. Whereas on something like Netflix, you have the subscription, then it can be part of your subscription. And then you have others like advertising, whether it be advertising video on demand. So you'll have to, like, for instance, if you're watching Hulu and you have that particular subscription level, you're going to get interrupted every now and then, but 45 minutes of commercials. So those agreements, there's a lot of similarities,
Mm-hmm.
But there's going to be some differences because they're a slightly different medium. When you're talking about theatrical, it's a completely different thing because you're dealing with the exhibitors. That would be saying AMC, a Regal Cinemas, and you're paid a film rental fee. So if you have a film, and there are companies who will deal directly with the exhibitors and get it in theaters, something we've done recently with one of our films, and they will take a fee. This agent, they're essentially an agent for theatrical. They will take a fee for their services of getting your film into theaters. But the theaters, the exhibitors, also take a fee. And for independent films, for studio films, it's about 50%, the film rental. That means they're going to pay you 50% of the box office for the film rental. Whereas when you're talking about independent films, it tends to be less because there's not as much print and advertising supporting it. So it can be anywhere from 34 to 37%. So in other words, if there's $1 million of box office, it could be about $370,000 starts trickling down to the filmmakers. Though there's going to be money taken out of it because there's going to be print and advertising, or P&A as it's called. And if you had an agent who you're working with, there are companies, like I said, that will deal with exhibitors directly. They're going to take their fee, but it's a very different than when you're dealing with the streamers, and very different if you're dealing with a company that's going to help you produce and distribute DVDs, which amazingly is still a thing.
I think we talked about that one episode, and I was like, wait, what?
Yep, it's still out there. It's
crazy.
not like it used to be.
Sure.
20 years ago, or whatever. DVDs were a huge source of revenue. But obviously, now it's with streaming has killed that, and that's why Blockbuster is effectively gone, except for I think one location somewhere.
One location,
I think somewhere like Washington State or Oregon.
I forget where it is, but there's a documentary. I think Kevin Smith did a documentary about it. But
the last Blockbuster or something.
I did see one of those boxes, I think, at like a Walmart or some big box store, that one of those like rental kiosks or whatever that you can do. I guess there's still a market for it.
They're still out there. Yeah, Walmart sells them. There's still a market for it. So those are different deals. They have different terms. There are, a lot of them are similar in the sense that there's a fee. Whoever is, if you're talking about, someone's taking a fee for their services, and then there's expenses that get deducted, and that's where really, there's a lot of potential issues in these agreements that producers, content creators have to be familiar with. About the terms, about the fees, about the expenses, because this is where, when I was talking about how it's analogous to fumbling a football on the 1 yard line after running it down the field. If, for example, in a distribution agreement, depending on what we're talking about, this really wouldn't apply to streamers in some cases, because some are buyouts. So if you have a buyout, it's just, well, here's what we're giving you. We're giving you a flat amount, and that's it. But other times, they're going to give you a percentage of what they receive. So, depending, for instance, some of these companies they'll deal with Amazon and Google Play and all these, and Roku and so forth, and they have different splits. So for every, and they vary. So in other words, Amazon will take, just for example, 50% of whatever the purchases are. So if your film is on there for $14.99, for example, you're splitting it with that platform, and then that split gets split some more, and off the top of whatever comes in are the expenses. So it's really important to pay attention to that, because where I see the issues where there's uncapped expenses or unaccountable expenses, or there's not sufficient accounting or audit clauses, because it's not very transparent. You'll get the producers, the filmmakers, the content creators, whoever it might be, they're going to get their statements quarterly and then eventually biannually and so forth. And it's going to say this much came in, and here's the deductions, and here's your check for $1 after everything's been taken off the top. So those agreements really need to be scrutinized carefully about the term, how long they're going to have the exclusive right to distribute that particular project. And that's important too, because they all want to keep it as long as possible. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't necessarily make sense for filmmakers, because if it's not generating revenue, then you want to see if you can monetize it some other way.
Is it just like that the filmmakers get so excited that they get a distribution deal that they sign something they shouldn't? Are the distributors trying? Do they actively try to take advantage of some of these smaller filmmakers? Like, how do these bad deals sort of come about?
I think it can be elements of both of those things. I think sometimes they may get a little desperate because they're not getting, because right now, for example, it's a tough acquisitions market, it's a tough distribution market because there was so much content created,
Yep.
and there's a glut of content, and there still is because there's so much distraction with how many YouTube channels are there, let
Yeah.
alone cable channels, let alone options with social media.
TikTok.
And
Yeah. People
yeah,
just
the
sit around and watch
TikTok,
TikTok for hours. Yeah.
yeah. So it's become much more difficult. So sometimes a bit out of desperation, they just take whatever deal. And these distributors are acting in their own best interest. So again, it's always very important to have an attorney who knows what they're doing to look at these agreements and pull them apart,
Right.
because you get one shot at this. You convey your rights. You give exclusive distribution rights, for example, for North America to a particular distributor. You give it to them for whatever period of time is agreed to, 3 years or 5 years or 7 years, and they're gonna take this fee off the top, and they're gonna have these expenses. Once you sign that, you're stuck with that deal. Yeah, there's typically it's hard to get out of those contracts because for to have something like a breach that would enable the filmmakers and producers to terminate the contract, that doesn't happen often. So it's something that has to be taken very deliberately and carefully. And the filmmakers, like I said, they really need to have someone look at it who knows what they're doing. And you want to do it. You want to get a distribution deal as soon as you can because you don't want your project sitting on the shelf, so to speak, and collecting dust and out there on IMDb, and it starts to become dated, and that becomes an issue. But you also, it doesn't make sense to sign a bad distribution deal either.
As far as marketing and release strategy, how much control does the distributor generally expect to have versus what does the filmmakers and producers get to have? How is that divvied up?
That can be some degree of negotiation. Generally speaking, distributors want to have control. Sometimes
really like all of the control.
Pretty much.
Wow.
You'll
Okay.
sometimes see terms in there where the producers will have meaningful consultation rights.
Okay.
And sometimes now the expenditure of money. Sometimes the producers can have some say about. Usually, there's certain amounts that they agree in advance that they're going to be permitted to spend on marketing. Because from the distributor's perspective, unless they can spend a certain amount of marketing money on it, well, then they're not going to be able to effectively distribute it. So they'll say, well, we have distribution expenses of 100,000, for example, and that's in their discretion how to spend it. A producer may get some meaningful consultation rights. That doesn't happen a lot, but if it's a project a distributor really wants, maybe they agree to that. But often what a producer can negotiate is that any spending over the agreed marketing expense, then that's something that they can report. They can even have prior approval rights. That I have seen and negotiated because that's money that if it's spent, it's coming out of what the producer will make. So if marketing spends $100,000, well, that's recouped before any money comes to the filmmakers. So that's why it's very important that one, the distribution expense. The distributor is going to take their distribution fee. So, for example, 30% off the top. So if there's $1 million received, they're going to take $300,000 off the top, and then they're going to recoup their expenses. So again, going to example, if there's 100,000, that's another 100,000 off the top. So then what's left starts trickling down to the filmmakers. So it's important to have as much control over the expenses, but in terms of how the marketing is going to go, they're going to want to have control. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because they have an interest in it. The filmmakers aren't experts in the marketing and advertising and promotion of a film. So the distributors are money motivated, but at the same time, the producers want to have a degree of control. They want to limit it as much as possible because just the more that's spent, the more money needs to be made before producers are going to see any back end, any profits from the distribution of the film.
And I'd imagine producers and directors would like to have somewhat of a say in how the message of the film or the project is being put out there too. So it makes sense that they'd want at least some sort of say in how the marketing strategy is going to go.
Yeah, again, that can be a function of who it is. Obviously, I've seen it where we're representing films that don't have as high a profile as others, and when we've been involved with films that had a high profile, we're able to extract better terms with distributors who want them. So there will be terms. I've gotten distributors to agree to terms on behalf of one client that they absolutely refuse on behalf of another, where they're like, no, these are the terms, take it or leave it. Whereas others like, okay, on a non-precedential basis, that being this is not a precedent, we're not agreeing to this again necessarily, but as it relates to this project, we'll agree to remove this term. We'll agree to, like I said, meaningful consultation. So, a lot has to do with, like anything in life, what's the demand for the project? If it's something that a distributor really wants, then they'll concede on points that they normally wouldn't, where it's just a title that, okay, that's a nice title. I think we could do something with it, but it's not something we're willing to, bend over backwards.
Yeah. We're not going to make too many concessions for certain projects.
Yeah, exactly.
What about sequels, future rights, international distribution, remakes, things like that? I mean, we see so many remakes these days. Does the distributor have any sort of claim to any of that?
Well, they try to. They absolutely do.
Yeah.
And that's one you can push back on, and I always strike that. Their argument that I don't think it's a great one is that, well, if there is a sequel, prequel, remake, it's due in part to the distribution of this,
to our work that we put into making. Yeah.
And it's like, well, no, it's because of the film we made. So that's something. It comes up. They most, this is definitely anecdotal, but I'd say most they try to say that they have a right of first negotiation or last refusal to distribute any future iteration, prequel, sequel, remake, or so forth. And that's one we're like, no, like that only. There are sometimes in instances where a distributor may have been involved with financing in some way. And so that is where there you might agree to that point. But if they're just a straight up distributor taking the distribution fee and then deducting the distribution costs and expenses, it's like that is one that I personally fight against every time, saying absolutely not. Because then it limits you. Because if it is a hit, and then you want to make the prequel, then you're stuck with the same distributor. Whereas there's probably, if there is going to be sequel or what have you, there's probably a lot of demand.
Right.
So they're going to have a lot more options. So that's an absolutely not. But that's an example of something that filmmakers or producers who are not, familiar might think, oh, this is just standard, because, unless you are familiar with these agreements, you're not going to know what is customary, standard, and reasonable, and what is overreaching, because 90% of it probably is customary and standard, and the distributors are going to stand by those terms. They're not going to really give for almost anybody. There are some things that they're just never going to relent on, no matter who it is, because it doesn't make any sense for them. But then there are the 10 to 15% of terms that they'll give a bit and they'll remove or modify.
Interesting stuff as always. All right. Well, thanks for tuning into this episode of Cut to Legal. If you're weighing a distribution offer and want to make sure you keep control of your rights and your revenue, visit PacittiLawFirm.com. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share the episode with someone who might need it. Really appreciate you watching our content. James, I always appreciate chatting with you. Thanks so much for being here.
Always a pleasure, Kevin. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.